Hi, I'm Emilie. I've been doing game design for 11 years and managing people for 7. The games industry has been trying to make me a producer, and I'm still resisting. But I do enjoy managing people and helping them grow, which is essentially, what people management is. It's not project management. It's not just breaking down tasks. It's caring about the team and the people in it, and making sure that they're in a work environment where they can do their best work. And for the purpose of this talk, when I refer to a manager, I'm not necessarily talking about a producer or even a lead. Sometimes if you're a more senior team member and you're helping out a junior on your team, you can still use a lot of these tools to help them grow and help them progress in their career and interact with them. And even if you're not a manager and you're just part of a team, sometimes you will unfortunately have to deal with average managers, and you can use some of these tools to manage upwards to try to help them give you the work environment that you need to produce your best work. So hopefully this is going to be helpful for a bunch of different people in different situations. But before we get started, I would like to know who in the crowd is managing people. A few? Who would like to manage people at some point? A few more? Who is just being managed at the moment? Some people are both. Okay. So that's just going to help me tailor my talk a little bit. But to get started, when I was first thinking about the theme of this year's GCAP, the walls we build ourselves, the first thing that came into my mind was this. I unfortunately had the opportunity to work in cubicles at some points, and they're really bad. The trend now is to go with open floor plans, which in some circumstances do a lot of good. In some others make it feel like everything is free and easy and there's no more walls. But as anyone who's ever interacted with people know, there's a lot of invisible walls everywhere. And as a manager, when you're running a team, when you're showing them by example how the culture should run, how they should interact with each other, you can inadvertently build more walls between team members. So the goal of today is really to try and avoid that from happening, because it happens a lot. Case in point, all of those memes. They're everywhere because people management is really hard because everyone is different, everyone has different communication styles. It's a challenge, and it's fully acknowledged by both people who are managing and people who are being managed. Who here has had a boss that you identify with the top part? And who here has been blessed and can identify with the lower part of having had a leader? Cool. So the goal of today is to help more of you be leaders. I've seen people management done wrong or being misadapted to certain team members and turn really talented people into negative elements within a team and just dragging down morale until they had to be fired because they were such negative forces within their team. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen a new manager come in with a different energy and good practices and take a team that was falling apart at the seams and pulling them back together so that they became a tremendous force for the company they were working in. So it's hard, but it's worth the effort. Because it's hard, when I was thinking about putting together this talk, I could have rivaled with Wizards of the Coast and just have a gazillion cards. Communication alone could be a multiple hours talk. So, maybe I'll do this again sometimes and just add more cards. But for today, I picked my go-tos. The tricks that I've found myself use over and over and over again over the years and are kind of second nature to me right now, and that I think can be a good foundation for your efforts. So I've tried to sort them out into 3 neat piles: empowerment, bonding, and troubleshooting, because no matter how hard we try, tensions will arise. I've picked these particular 3 because, to me, they are essential to creating a really collaborative workspace that has as few walls as possible and have people genuinely connecting and working together to solve the complex problems that are games. So let's get started with empowerment, or as I like to think about it, making people happy about doing more stuff. So any project manager can generate a to-do list. And anyone can go through a to-do list and just check the list. Unfortunately, when a team is only doing that, checking items off of a to-do list, they're not looking ahead at potential problems. They're not engaging and motivated by what they're doing. And it's harder to make them care about what they're doing than to give them a checklist. But when you manage to get a team, or even a single team member, more engaged, they're gonna make your job easier. So it's really worth spending time in building those relationships and make sure that the people on the team are empowered to do their best work and to help you do yours. And that takes us to card 1. Have you ever felt like what you're doing is dumb? That the ways you're told to do things don't make sense? That you're just going through the motions and it's kind of meh? That is often because you do not have a why. One of the most important tools that I use both when I do game design and when I run teams is to provide a why, to provide context to what the hell we're doing. And it just requires summoning your inner 2-year-old and asking why about everything until you hit the end. The idea here is that having a good why will clarify the purpose of a single discussion. So when I run a brainstorming meeting, I start with, here's why we're having this meeting, here's the problem that I'm trying to solve, and then we brainstorm. It provides context to actions as well, so that if we're going through the motions of preparing a demo or producing a particular feature, I know why I'm doing this and how it plays into the bigger goals of the project or the company. It also enables team members to make relevant suggestions. So when we're just debating ideas when talking about a game, it's really easy to get emotionally attached to the idea that you're proposing and start defending the idea for itself as opposed to how it solves a problem for the game. If you have the why and you know why the pieces are meant to work a certain way, you can disagree with the solution and troubleshoot the problem together. And it means that you have more chances of your suggestions be accepted and be good because you understand the context that they need to satisfy. And that's why when I write game design documents, because you can do that on the macro of like company goals, but you can also do that on the small scope of, I'm writing a design document, and I start all of my feature designs with a why. So Agile has an inbuilt why in the form of user stories, which forces you to look at what is the user getting out of it, which is an answer to why am I developing this feature. I'll often add design goals as to the purpose of this system or this feature within the greater whole of what we're building, what feelings I'm trying to communicate, what key performance indicators it's meant to move the needle on. And with that context, then I provide one solution to this problem, one answer to this. And sometimes coders or artists will look at the solution and go, don't think this is the best solution. But because they understand the context of what I'm trying to do, they understand the why, they'll come to me with, hey, I'm seeing these solutions that have these different strengths and weaknesses in solving the why. And then we have a very constructive discussion around which one is genuinely best, as opposed to which one is cooler. And that's really positive as an experience, because when they push an idea through and they feel comfortable and strong in their position about their ideas, it's really satisfying because they're part of the process. And that brings me to a power-up for our whys. Yes, I went all out on this card metaphor, which is the flags. So have you ever sat at your desk and someone comes to you, interrupts your work, starts a conversation, and you find yourself playing catch-up to understand why are we having this conversation and what are we even talking about? And it takes a while for you to get up to speed. Or you're having a conversation and you're confused about the purpose of it. This is what flags are for. When you know the context and the purpose of what you're doing, you can then start signposting your conversations and help align everyone on what their role in this conversation is. Because as a manager, you've been thinking about all of these things and solutions to problems, and you're way over here in your thinking, and the person you're going to talk to is there. And if you just start talking, it's going to take them a while to hike their way to where you are. But if you use the proper flag, you align the two of them right from the beginning of the conversation. That prevents confusion and frustration and feeling lost in conversations. It increases efficiency of all of these conversations. And it also empowers people to be active participants in what's happening instead of catching up and being out of breath and then trying to participate. You can use flags at the beginning of conversations or at the end of them as well. One of the managers that I worked with had this habit of coming to me and start talking about things that we had to do in this current build, and then without flagging it, switch into lofty ideas of what we might want to do later. For me, I was thinking about what we're doing in this build, and then he starts with those ideas, and I'm like, but we can't do that, there's no time. Which was really frustrating for him, because he felt like I was rejecting everything. But we weren't at the same place. I didn't know that they were just lofty ideas. And when we started signposting, I first started by asking, are these just ideas? Okay, cool. And then he developed the reflex of using flags along the way. With other teams, when we had a conversation that led into a task or something that needed to be done, we had an end flag to those conversations. That was, who's gonna write the Jira ticket or the Trello card, whatever project management you're using, so that the tasks wouldn't get lost. And it was also an opportunity for whoever is in the conversation to go, I'm not actually clear on what this task is, or I don't think we're done discussing this. Another neat tool that I ended up using at my previous job, thank you, Anthea, was my producer hat. So what was happening at that job is that I was juggling the role of lead game designer and senior producer all at once. And when I was in meetings or when I was coming to talk to people's desk, I started noticing confusion as to, was I speaking from a point of view of creative leadership or from a point of view of we need to get shit done? So I found myself saying over and over again, I have my producer hat on. I have my producer hat on as a flag to those conversations, and then decided to get a producer hat that I could just put on when I had my producer hat on. I didn't wear it as much as I would have liked because we thankfully hired a senior producer. Now, card number 3. Have you ever felt stagnant in the roles that you were in, or not having much purpose, not having much path to grow, all of these things? That's usually because there are no SMART goals in place. So SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's basically a sanity check to see if the goals that you've set are good. And the relevant aspect of it is essentially, how does it tie to the why? How does it link to the bigger context of what we're doing? And what it does is, by having these goals, it creates this really clear track from where we are now to why we're doing what we're doing, and breaks it down into very actionable steps that you also get to celebrate every time you meet one. So it helps align all of the team efforts. It sets very satisfying milestones that I can check off the list and that I'm engaged in because I've committed to this goal and I've discussed it with my manager. It leads to purposeful growth because the type of discussion that you have around SMART goals, because they need to be relevant, people will discuss what is needed for the project or the company, why should we set a goal, and then see myself, why do I want this goal, and how do the two align in blissful harmony so that we can do amazing stuff together. And the important thing about SMART goals as well is that it creates a mutual commitment. A SMART goal is something that you discuss between manager and the person who's going to meet the goal. And you both agree that this is a valid goal and that you're both working together achieving it. I'm going to give you an example. Very relevant. This is a goal you may decide to set for yourself. I will use lessons from GCAP to implement one management technique before the end of the year so the whole team benefits from my learnings. Use one lesson from GCAP to implement one management technique is very specific, and it's also measurable. And it's not insane in terms of amount of work, which is also really important. Before the end of the year is time-bound, and it gives you a clear date where you can check back to see if the goal has been met or no. And it is relevant to the team because most of the time when a studio sends people to conferences, they want your personal growth to also impact the general team. And it's very fulfilling when you know that you have that impact as well. So it's a common goal. And all of this put together should be achievable. Now, for some people who are experienced manager, maybe doing 3 management techniques is the right amount of challenge, because you don't want it to be boring, and you don't want it to be too hard, just like a good quest. It needs to find that sweet spot. For new managers, 1 may be all they can manage, or sometimes you'll lengthen the timeline. The important thing here is that because it's a conversation with the manager, as a manager, I need to enable you to do this thing. That means supporting the person. That means if it's something that takes time, that isn't part of core tasks, that means allowing time for that to happen. And then it really feels like we're collaborating together to grow as a team. This is also a tool that I use when I onboard new junior team members. So if you're buddying and helping a junior team member, it's a good idea for you to have a suggestion of SMART goals to begin with, to discuss with them about how you expect them to progress in the first 3 or 6 months, and give them a chance to react and agree or disagree, but then both commit to trying to make that happen. Because then you feel like you have purpose, like you're integrated, and you're working towards something greater than just checking a thing off the to-do list for today. And now we move on to the category of bonding, which I summarize as forestalling the apparition of the weakest link. It sounds a bit gloomy. Bear with me for a second. We've all heard the saying that a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And the goal is that within a team you try to not have a weakest link. But in terms of, skills is one thing, but here we care about relationships. Over time, people change, the goals don't align anymore, people will leave, and new ones will come in. It happens. It's the reality of progressing through a career, and that's not a bad thing. So weakest links will happen for a variety of reasons. But when you consistently work on bonding with your team, you're pushing back the date at which it happens. You can never take relationships for granted. I've worked with one of my friends and we had like bonding activities as friends outside of work, because if we started taking our friendship for granted, we were gonna lose it and just always be in a work relationship. And that applies with your interactions with your team as well. One of the things that often happens when you work on a team, you can feel disconnected, out of the loop, unheard, like you don't have an opportunity to really access your manager because they're always busy. My card for this one is one-on-one meetings. I love one-on-one meetings for a variety of reasons. The main thing for me is really in those first 3 words. It's about caring for team members, it's about creating safe spaces, and it's about preventing tensions. The idea with one-on-ones is not just to have a meeting one person with another. You can do that, but you're not going to get the most out of it. It needs to be a purposeful commitment to spending time listening to team members and showing them that you care about that process happening. And when you do that, it shows that you value your team. It creates a space for them to voice anything that's on their mind, from the tiny little thing that annoys them with that animation task that they do all the time, to that bigger, I hate this person. It makes it okay to have all of these conversations. And because you have this connection and creating this bond, it also improves communications even outside the meeting. And it can allow spotting tensions really early and clearing misunderstandings between you and the person you're managing really, really early on. You can use that with people you don't get along with well at work, even if you're not manager-managee. It's really useful, and it diffuses a lot of situations if you know that there's regular opportunity for you to talk about whatever's bothering you. Now, I have a creed in terms of how I like to run one-on-one meetings. The first thing is to schedule recurring meetings. Find the frequency that works for your team, whether that's 1 per week, 1 every fortnight, 1 every month. Find a frequency, schedule the meeting, and don't move them. And the reason for that is that if you say that the goal of this meeting is to commit to listening, and you keep shifting it, it undercuts your words. Because what it shows is that it's less important than other things. Now, every now and then, you'll have no choice. It happens. But if it's a habit to constantly shifting them, it undercuts the value of the meeting happening to begin with. Make sure that the person you're meeting with knows the why. It's your time to talk to me about whatever you want. As a manager, you have 30 hours a week easy to tell them what you want. If you want to do performance management, you can schedule a meeting for that. This is not the meeting for that. This meeting is about them talking to you. And that leads me to the next point of don't have an agenda. Let them lead the conversation. Now, I just said if you want to do performance management, do it in a separate meeting. Sometimes, as the person is talking, they're going to come up with issues that they're running into, and it's going to be a great opportunity for you to step in and provide some feedback, tools, help, and do a little bit of growth opportunity or suggest a SMART goal or something at that point in time. You can take advantage of those opportunities, but if they want to rent for the duration of the meeting, which you can make it 15 minutes, 30 minutes is a good length, that's their time to do with whatever they please. And not everyone is comfortable just volunteering information. So you'll have to make an effort to get them to talk sometimes and to start creating that relationship. And that is where the power-up comes in. the scale, or as the Sydney Get That Game Done goer have started calling it, the Emilie scale, is a very simple tool. And it sounds a bit silly. When you ask people, how are you doing? The answer is always, fine. That's not helpful. So I never ask that. Instead, when I start one-on-one meetings, I ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? Now, some people will just pick a number, and then I get to ask, why? Because I want to understand how they're managing their own scale, why they're at a 7 and not an 8. And that leads to long discussions about what's working, what's not working. And sometimes people don't want to pick a number. They just start talking about, well, right now, this is good, this is not so good. And then I'll come back to it and go, so is that a 5? Until they commit to a number. And there's a reason for that. Once you start using that as a shorthand for communications, it has several benefits. So just asking the question, an open question, dodges the default answers and leads to follow-up questions and bigger discussions. As a manager, it also helps me track patterns. Between one-on-one meeting, is the number improving? Is the number going down? Why? It gives me an idea of where people are sitting. It also helps, at some point, for some people, evolve it into a really shorthand. One example from a few teams that I've worked with, I've had this a couple of times. I've had someone ping me on Slack or whatever internal messaging system is and tell me something like, I'm at 2, which automatically triggers, let's go grab coffee. By having this, it first makes it okay for people to not be okay and to acknowledge it as transparently as possible. And know that if they're not okay, I'm going to drop everything and we're going to fix it. Card number 6. You may sometimes feel like you're making the same mistakes over and over again as a team. It happens. And this is why Agile has the retrospective built into it. Yes. As a team, you want to make sure you look back. It's good to do build reviews. It's good to assess how many Trello cards have moved to the done pile. It's fantastic. But that's just what the work is, not how you work. And it's important to take a break and look back at how you're working together to make sure that no one gets at a 2. And doing that gives an opportunity for everyone to voice what's going well, what's not going well, what we should keep doing, what we should stop doing. It helps bring to the surface different problematics that you may not have seen. And sometimes it also brings to the surface misunderstandings or misalignments that you then have an opportunity to clarify, realign, and make sure everyone understands why the processes are what they are. And perhaps more importantly, it leads to an agreement of what the priorities are in terms of problem solving. As a manager, you're often called upon to fix everything. And sometimes it's really overwhelming and there's a lot going on. And it's hard to know what's more important and what's more dire. And retrospective will show you that in bright and shiny colors. One team that I worked with was a team of 6 who was responsible for pitching contracts which kept 350 people employed or led to unemployment. 3 to 15 projects running at once, 5 to 21 days turnaround time, insanity. It was really, really stressful. And there was a lot of things going on, and there were a lot of things that were going wrong as well. And because of the pace, people were like, well, we can't review each project. We have way too many. It's going by way too fast. So as a team, we agreed to have lunch once a month to do a retrospective. At the beginning, the agreement was this lunch hour may be unpaid, because depending on the week that it fell on, we could be crunching and they could already be working overtime, but we wanted this lunch hour to still happen so that one day it would be a paid hour, because there would be no more overtime because we would have fixed the problems. And we just went around the table, saw what was working, what didn't work, and after that we compiled the list, prioritized it, and I committed to solving the first priority. At the very least, every month, the first priority would be taken care of. And by consistently showing that these improvements were happening, the level of stress went down, even if there were still problems, because at least there was forward momentum in solving things. And that was all through discussions, turning problems into smart goals, and then hitting those deadlines. Which brings us to troubleshooting. Turning the inevitable tension into growth. Tension will happen. Working with different people, we all have bad days. Things build up over time. It will happen. So how do we take this tension and actually transform it into something we can do, improve, grow, make things better? I'm sure we've all ranted before. Good heartfelt rant. Sometimes you just need to let that go. But sometimes you also feel like it doesn't help, because you're just peddling negative emotions and feeling stuck in it. My tool for that is the Bullseye. You may be familiar with the Serenity Prayer. Give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the one that I can, and the wisdom to see the difference. There you go. So the idea here is that there are things that you can control that are 100% things that you can act on. There are things that you can influence, and then there's everything else. You cannot do anything about the weather. I'm sorry. When someone comes to me with a rant, I automatically pull this up in my brain to start sorting through, out of everything that is concerning, what can we actually do right now to make this better? And using this gets to the heart of actionable issues, things that you can solve. It also helps you reframe non-actionable concern and talk through, okay, we can't do anything about this. How can we solve the problems we can to alleviate those concerns, instead of having this big blob of everything is evil? It diffuses rants and turns them into super useful pieces of information for you to manage the team, and it sets a foundation to create smart goals. So you can either pull out a sheet of paper with the circles and fill them with the person. I've done this before. I've also just done it mentally in my brain, and then use that to talk the person towards the thing we could actually do something about. Everyone on the team has these circles, and obviously they overlap. So if the leftmost circle is a junior game designer, the right one is me. The junior game designer has complete control over features, but it is influenced by the greater vision for the game, and that's what I control. And what they're doing with the feature can lead them to question the greater vision and get me to revise it. They can influence me in that way, but they don't have control over it. A lot of problems between team members happen when the circles don't overlap the right way. If both of our circles of controls overlap, that can lead to a lot of tension. If I'm consistently stealing features that the person thinks they have control over and redoing them or changing them behind their back, it's going to make them feel like what they're doing is aimless. If a junior designer is more preoccupied about telling me what the greater vision of the game is, we're having a problem too. And when you're thinking about the things that you can act on now, because it's a two-people conversation, you don't get to act within only one circle of control, but two. There are things that the person you're managing can do, and there are things that you can do as the manager to alleviate some of these concerns. And theoretically, you can daisy chain that. So maybe there are problems that you can't control, but you can influence someone else to solve. But the more you add layers to that daisy chain, the less solvable the problem is. If you're working at EA and you're worried about the general company direction, as a junior designer in Australia, nothing much we can do about it. It's way too far up the daisy chain. So working with people, working with a manager, sometimes we feel like they're oblivious and they're not seeing their own difficult times. And sometimes they're rude or they're not explaining properly or blah, blah, blah. And as a manager, that's one of the things that can keep you up at night. Like, am I doing the right thing? You want to make sure that every now and then you take a third-person view at yourself. One of your key tools to be a good people manager is self-awareness and emotional intelligence. The more you know yourself, the more you know what your go-to patterns are in terms of explaining things, reacting to things, what triggers anger. The more you're aware of all of this, the better you can adapt to what your team actually needs. And all of the tools that I've given you so far, you can basically use on yourself to help take a look at yourself in third-person view. It'll help you be your best. And be sure that you create a work environment that for yourself is also positive. It enables you to adapt to what your team needs because you understand what your default go-to is and how eventually everyone reacts to that default. And then you can adapt and pick different behaviors for different team members. It fosters self-care. Looking at yourself in third person and seeing when you're just done is good. Because whether or not you acknowledge it, your team will know it. And they will see your stress. And they will potentially suffer from it. So it's better if you fully acknowledge it and start doing things about it. It shows you growth opportunities for yourself as well, so that you can go to your manager and seek help for additional skills that you may not have, or create your own SMART goals. And I have a power-up for this one too. When you have the ability to look at yourself in third person and acknowledge when you're overwhelmed or when you don't know something, it's okay for you to have weaknesses. And for me, it is part of the people management toolset as well. It is the #1 mistake of new managers to feel like they have to be superhuman, that they are not allowed to show weakness because it's going to damage their team's trust in their ability. That is not true. When you show that you have limitations, that there are things that you don't know, that you're stressed today, and you communicate that, you make it okay for everyone else to have a bad day and talk to you about it. It makes you human. It makes you relatable. And it creates a safe space for everyone to collaborate in helping each other out. Now, you don't want to just go around and always complain about how stressed you are to every team member. It's not their job to do your emotional labor. But there are always relevant team members with whom you can share part of the burden. If you're not particularly skilled in AI programming, that's okay for you as a manager to not know everything and lean on someone who is super skilled to do this and help you with it. They'll feel empowered. They'll feel good about being part of the process, and they'll respect you for knowing that you're not perfect. So showing weaknesses will make you human and relatable. it will encourage team members to ask for help when they need it. And it empowers them to support you so that this relationship goes both ways. And that's why I made it a bonding card and not a troubleshooting one. It prevents unnecessary tensions as well. So if you remember the story that I told earlier about that team with crazy amount of pressure and retrospectives once a month, the reason that made me push to have a retrospective is because I was feeling overwhelmed. And the first retrospective that we had, I told them, look, right now I'm stretched thin, I'm trying to fix everything, and I'm not going to be able to do it. So I want us as a team to decide what my priority is. And whatever it is, I'm going to fix that one. But I'm asking you for your patience on the other ones. I'm going to get to them. It's just going to take a little bit longer. And with that team as well, I was very lucky. They were all experienced senior team members. So it's one of the teams where I was able, when I was working overtime and on a really, really stressful day, to come in and say, at the morning stand-up, hey, everyone, I'm really slammed today. I'm stressed. I'm sorry in advance if I'm a little bit more direct. It's not against you. You haven't done anything wrong. I'm just limited energy today. And that meant that a lot of tensions that could have happened because people presumed that I was snapping at them because they did something wrong, didn't. Because they knew that today was one day out of 50 where Emilie's struggling a little bit, that's okay. And that just created a space where as a team we could ace everything that we started doing. So much so that the higher ups of the company were looking at the team and going, we don't understand how this works, but it does, don't touch it. Just let it run. So pick your moments. Don't burden your teams with how overwhelmed you are, but don't feel like you can't share any of that either. And that wraps up the cards that I've chosen for today's Cards Against People Mismanagement. Hopefully there are some tips in there that are going to help you break down walls between your team members and also prevent some from forming and diffuse existing tensions if there are any. And yeah, do we have time for questions? Yes, I'm getting a yes. So anyone? Yes? Yes. So previous team I worked with, some of the people I worked with had never delivered games before. So their understanding of game design was a bit weird. Or they didn't know much about it, really, and had a problem getting interested and so understanding what I was doing and so respecting it because they don't understand it. A lot of it boils down to patience and education. If you can, showing what you're doing in a way that they understand it, adapting your communication so that they understand it. Once they can grasp it, they can see how good you are at doing it. But if they don't understand what you're doing to begin with, it makes it harder. Using the why as well can be really useful. If they understand why you're doing the things that you're doing, they can agree with the why even if they don't understand the steps, and they can respect you for having a good why or having a good SMART goal that you're proposing. So using those tools to frame conversations and invite them into the reality of what you're doing can help lead to trust. Yes?
Have you ever worked with geographically distributed teams, and do you have any tips on how you go about communicating with them, or maybe some communication barriers
I haven't. I've had a lot of discussions with people who have, though, worked with, people in different time zones and everything. Basically, what it returns to most of the time is that the same tools apply, but it takes a little bit more effort to make them apply, especially when there's different time zones involved. Getting one-on-ones isn't as easy. You can space out the frequency of them or do things like that, or find asynchronous ways to still do them. Whether it's online boards, online messaging, or anything like that, but try to find ways for these tools to still be used, because especially when people are remote, it's really easy to feel disconnected. And I would say pay special attention to the why and the bonding tools to make sure that that happens and connects. Because it's easy to feel like you're working in isolation and don't really know what's happening in the great beyond or wherever other people are. Yes?
Have you ever had any times where someone's come to you and realized this is actually really hard for my experience and how to me, an outside therapist or something like that? Like, how do you deal with that when that situation?
Yeah, so it's first really important to not go outside of your skill level. If someone needs a therapist, they need a therapist. And you shouldn't put that pressure on yourself to try and be a therapist if you're not. I've been lucky enough that most of the people who were having a lot of anxiety and stuff like that were before it was, a big problem. And we could solve things within the workplace to alleviate that. And the root causes of these things. I haven't had anyone who needed a therapist, but I've always worked at companies who had those programs available so that it could be suggested and recommended. And I've always had open conversations as well through one-on-ones with people who were already seeing therapists. So that I could be part of that process. And when you create that bond and there's this level of trust, it may be easier to have these conversations. But I unfortunately don't have any more precise tool for that situation. Anyone else? Yes?
In the one-on-one talks,
Yeah.
just wondering, should you minute those one-on-one talks, or is that something that you just do on a case-by-case? It's just an open conversation, but then maybe there's some actionable points that you should minute?
So I tend to be more like that in between. I feel like minuting everything can stifle conversations a lot and potentially keep some topics from being discussed because people don't want them on paper. But definitely I keep a notebook with me all the time so that when we start going into feedback, SMART goals, anything actionable, we can write it down and confirm it by email so that that commitment is recorded. Do we still have time for more? One more. Okay. Yes?
What's your thoughts on delegating responsibility?
I'm a big fan of delegating responsibilities. So I had one position where someone told me, you shouldn't get this person on your team because they want your job. And I was like, bring him. I'm going to train them to do my job, and then I'm going to do something else. The thing is, the empowerment tools are really important when you want to delegate more responsibility. You need to safely monitor how much the person can actually take. Because I've seen managers go, oh, we're just dumping all of this stuff on them. It's empowerment. But the people aren't ready. They feel overwhelmed. They're struggling. And that's not a positive way to do it. But by structuring it with SMART goals, you can gradually delegate more and more in a way that feels like they're in control of the pace. And that's still an opportunity for you to push them a little bit, to take a little bit more and go a bit outside of their comfort zone without just throwing them into the frying pan. So that's it for today. I'm going to be around in the hall if you have any additional question. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm happy to start an elaborate thread about just about anything. So feel free to poke me. Thank you for your time.